Welcome to the Financial Freedom Podcast, everybody. This is a podcast all about empowering you with financial literacy, helping guide you on your journey to financial freedom. And I'm really excited about today's guest. Joseph Reinke and I have become great friends and admirers of one another over the last couple of months working together. And Joe is a Chartered Financial Analyst, which basically means he's a rock star of finance and money management. It's a very difficult certification to get. He's been investing since he was 12 years old. We're definitely going to dial into that and hear a little bit about how his investment journey started so young. And he's been working diligently in personal finance for over 15 years. He has experience in mortgages, wealth management, investing, valuation work, investment banking, and the list really goes on and on and on. He's also the founder of FitBUX. And FitBUX is a new technology that automates financial planning, makes it easy for you to build and implement a financial plan. Individuals working within the FitBUX platform, they're actually now managing over $2.2 billion in assets and debt on the FitBUX platform. And in addition, Joe has been on more than 200 podcasts, blogs, and speaking events in the last 5 years. So Joe, you've got quite the list of accomplishments behind you. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. How are you doing today, buddy?
Good. I'm listening to those 15 years I've been working in personal finance, and it makes me feel old. So
it's bound to happen to us sooner or later, my friend. Let's swap old for experienced.
It's funny when I'm on doing stuff for universities, I'm talking to like 24 to 30-year-olds, and I always say we, and it's like, wait, I'm not that age anymore.
Well, as long as you feel young and we've got our health and our vibrance, I think we could pull it off for a few more years. Joe, let's jump in with, how you got started down this path of financial literacy and just being interested in finance. You started investing at 12 years old. So just tell us a little bit about your journey to get us started.
Yeah. I mean, it even started kind of before I was even 12. I used to, for example, be really into like sports and trading cards, like baseball cards, football cards. And I used to, back in the day, there was like a magazine that would come out called Beckett, and they would come out monthly with pricing for sports cards. And at like 8, I would go to the card store and look at these cards that were for a penny, that they were selling for a penny, but in Beckett, they said they were 5 cents. And I just started buying them. I was basically like, well, they're worth this much. Why shouldn't I buy this for a penny? And I'm getting basically 5x on my investment. At 8 years old, I didn't realize that you actually had to find somebody else to buy them for that value. But that was kind of like my first foray, and I didn't understand it back then. But basically, in finance, that's what we call an arbitrage fund. Is I was trying to find something that I could buy for cheap and sell somewhere else for. And I was like at 8, and then I grew up around a family of entrepreneurs, so like around 9 or 10, I started playing ice hockey, and my dad had his own store, self-employed, and I was like, Dad, I need some new skates, and he'd be like, okay, we'll go work. And I would start, going out and selling all like the different equipment and costumes and stuff that they had. And I'd keep a total of how much I sold and be like, Dad, all right, I sold $300 worth of stuff. Go buy me skates. And that's how I learned about profit margin, is that just because you sold it for 300 didn't mean you made 300. And so I've just been around it my whole life. And then around 12 years old was when I started getting this concept of like, wait a second, I can buy a piece of property and somebody else pays rent. Like, why doesn't everybody do that? And so my first real investment was part of a real estate investment fund that my dad was in. It was 12 years old. I was about $5,000 that I put into it. Of course, I lost it all. So it was a good learning lesson. And then, when I got into college, because I was primarily around real estate and just businesses my entire life. My parents and nobody I knew really did anything with stocks. My dad hates the stock market, for example, and doesn't trust it and rather do real estate. And then my first year in college, I started learning about the stock market and option trading and all that type of stuff. And, the rest was history from there. I just went head deep into it. But my thing was always I didn't learn investments and finance because that's what I wanted to do for a living. I wanted to learn it to have a basic understanding so I can do whatever I wanted to. My thing back then was sports, like working in sports and so on and so forth. Like my first job actually out of college was working for the Los Angeles Dodgers. So I wasn't even in finance, and I had no inclination of going into finance. I was just learning it for myself. And then the rest grew from there. When I left the Dodgers, it was like, well, my background's in money, like, let's go work in that. So I started working for a mortgage company right before the debacle happened in 2007. Went into
that was an interesting time.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I went into wealth management, and within that year to 2 year span was kind of like my first slap in the face of, a lot of people don't know this stuff. And I started looking at the financial planning, wealth management, mortgages, everything, like what's the bigger problems here? And that's when I started developing out different algorithms that say, hey, how can we piece all this stuff together? And, it all came together. That was in 2010, 2011. And I stopped doing it because I went into investment banking and valuation. And around 2015, 2014 was when some of my friends kept coming to me saying, hey, I'm living paycheck to paycheck. And my wife's colleagues were coming to me asking for help. I'm like, well, I got these algorithms. Like, I think they can help you. And they started using them. They're like, holy cow. And that's when FitBUX was launched. It was like, all right, let's actually make a company out of this. So, but yeah, that's my background, like finance, how I got started, why I got started. The charter, like the CFA charter, I put myself through that. I look at it now. It's like, all I did was I was just trying to learn what other people knew. Like, what do the experts know? And then what can I take what they know and then add on to that? And so I wasn't doing it because I wanted to use a CFA. I didn't want to go to Wall Street. Like, I was doing it just to learn. Now, and then I went through it and it was like, oh shit, like that was a lot, but I use it every day. So it was worth it.
I love that story, man. And one of the nuggets I pulled out of there, and something that I think a lot about as a parent, is the fact that I think a lot of people think about inheritance as passing down of money, right? Or maybe of real estate or something like that. But really it's just a passing of money. I think of inheritance more as a passing down of knowledge or information. And so, you mentioned that you said you wanted to buy something and your dad said, great, well, you better go earn the money. And then that kind of got you curious. And eventually you had savings, which you invested. I recently had my son, Xander, invest in 2 of our real estate buildings. And so it was this whole really interesting process of him having a bank account. Same thing, he's a car guy. So, he's 12 years old. He's saving for his car and he's looking at his checking account statements and seeing that he's getting a 0.1% return or 0.2% return. Grandma and myself and my wife, we're talking about, investing in real estate and getting much higher returns than that. And so one day he says, how much money do I need to have to invest in real estate? And then that turned into this whole investigation where he started to figure out, what should I do with my money? And now he's a partner in 2 of our real estate buildings. So I think the first lesson that we'll pull out of this conversation, Joe, is that, an inheritance and what we do for our kids isn't just the passing on of the money, but it's challenging them to save money and then encouraging them to think about where they can put that money so that it can grow faster than, hopefully faster than the rate of inflation. That might be a little challenging to do today, but that's the goal.
Yeah, I'm already doing it with my 5-year-old. Like, she earns for her learning lessons because we homeschool her. So every learning lesson that she does, she gets $1. And then she can only spend every month of what she has saved. She can only spend 0.5% of it. So right now she's up to having saved like $3,500 and she only has $20 a month to spend. And she's already like, Dad, I don't want to buy that because I'd rather save it for something else. And now she's starting to understand the concepts of interest because she's like, well, wait, my account went up and I didn't do anything. It's like, well, yeah, it's earning something. And she's like, oh, and her mom made the comment like, that's what Daddy does, is invest stuff and makes it grow without working. And I was like, so what do you want to invest in, little one? And she's like, I don't need to. I'll just give it to you, Dad. And it was like, oh, no, you need to learn this stuff.
Well, I know the curiosity will take over as she gets older. And I think our job as parents is just to get them started and give them opportunities to get curious and to learn. So that was great. That was a great way to kick us off, Joe. Thanks for the story. And your little one might pop in. I know she's been a guest star on a few of our things we've done together since you homeschool her. She's adorable.
She's out today. She's with mom going dentist, ballet lessons, and then swimming. So she's pretty much out all day.
She's got a full day.
Oh yeah.
All right. Well, maybe another episode. Well, Joe, I know you and your whole team at FitBUX have an incredible amount of experience. I believe your team has helped over 11,000 young professionals build and really implement a plan to deal with student loans, retirement, home buying, investing. And my question to you is this: with all that experience of serving over 11,000 young professionals, what do you see as the primary challenge or mistake that young professionals are making today?
Yeah, there's a few challenges and there's a few mistakes. I'll start with the challenges. We oftentimes talk about like focus. That's one of the big things. So again, that's part of the mistake and the challenge is the mistake is people don't focus. So I'll talk to like a young professional and they'll be like, well, I want to pay off my student loans. I want to save for a house. I want to put money in a 401k, an IRA. I need to save for a wedding. I need to save for a car. We're gonna have children. I need a 529 plan. And it's like, okay, that's like 9 things you just rattle off.
Right.
Statistically, if you try to do all those, you're not going to do any of them. And so what I've learned, even just with myself, is the more you focus on something, the faster you're going to accomplish stuff. And so focusing is one of the biggest mistakes, or a lack of focus is one of the biggest mistakes we see. The challenge is, when it comes to focus is you need some certainty, right? So in business, we used to say all the time, and I'll give you an example. In 2008, when one party takes over all 3 branches of government, so the House, the Senate, and the presidency, businesses in Wall Street don't tend to like that because we can't predict what's going to happen. We don't know what laws are going to be passed. Whereas when one of those 3 is the opposite party, we basically know nothing is going to get passed through Washington. And so we know, hey, we have some certainty going forward. So as a business, you can plan. So like in 2008, 2010, you didn't see that much growth in the stock market, especially for how much money was dumped into the economy. I think it was up like 5% from 2008, 2010. And then when Republicans took over the House, it was basically like nothing else is going to get passed. We know that. We got 6 years of, we know what's coming. We know what there's the deal with Obamacare. We know what the deals with this and that. And you just saw the market just take off, right? So like take that knowledge and then say, okay, well, how do I apply this to myself? In terms of just finances, it's like, get rid of the noise. What can I focus on? And one of the biggest challenges for young individuals are student loans. There's so much noise around student loans. There's 10 different student loan repayment plans, actually 9 right now, but President Biden's coming out with the 10th one in next June as of right now. So now it's like, should I switch? Should I not? What do I do? Is it going to go for forgiveness? There's so many different things going on around student loans. It's like, what am I supposed to do? There's no certainty there. And so that's one of the biggest challenges. Other than that, we'll touch on it probably a little bit later on, but it's inflation. How do I gear up for that? Like, I need to be able to save. I need to be able to pay off debt, but just to buy groceries is taking out all my paycheck, right? So, trying to deal with that. Those are the big ones right now. And then when it comes to home buying, I'm not telling you anything you don't know is home affordability. Like, again, that's the whole inflation thing, right? Now mortgage interest rates are going up. So how can I afford to buy a house? What am I supposed to do there? So those are the big challenges that we see. And then to the mistake side is lack of focusing, but also a lack of planning. A lot of young people, they'll sit there and they use the excuse of I'd rather just live for today. And it's like, well, your future self is going to hate you. But what I've found out from a lot of them actually is that they don't truly believe that, right? We have this ego about us that don't want to admit what we don't know. And oftentimes, you graduate from college, because we primarily deal with college graduates as well as graduates, like graduate students that get their masters and healthcare doctorates and stuff. And they're being told that, you're the smartest of the smartest now because you graduated from these universities. So you're like the upper echelon of intelligence. And so their ego doesn't want to admit what they don't know. And so they rather just not get help because they don't want to admit that they need it, because they're supposed to be all knowing, right? Like they just graduated. They're supposed to know everything. And so a lot of them will just put their head down. We hear it all the time for the last 2 years because of COVID. There's been no payments for student loans. And so we'll get the question like, why do I need to build a financial plan? Like I don't have student loan payments right now. It's like, so your finances don't have anything to do with anything else besides student loans? Like,
right.
We hear that all the time. And so that's the big thing is focusing, but also getting started and admitting that you need help so you can put yourself on the right path.
Yeah. And as it relates to the right path, one of the notes I just took down there is it seems like there needs to be some sort of a sequence here, right? Some sort of a path so that you can obtain that certainty that you mentioned. So let's pivot into, what FitBUX does. Tell us a little bit about the platform and how does it help people understand what the sequence should be, whether it's pay down debt, invest, buy a house. You mentioned all those, fund the 529 plan. Like there's all these things that boxes that need to be checked, but it seems like there needs to be a sequence in order to arrive at that certainty. How can FitBUX help with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So this goes to some of the flaws that I saw when I was in wealth management and banking and all that stuff. Was I saw problems from a business standpoint, but also the consumer standpoint, and primarily the consumers, right? So if you think about this, we have all these different things, like you mentioned, student loans, banking, bill pay, mortgages, car loans, insurance, all these different things.
Yeah.
And there's professionals in all of them, and they know details of those specific things, but they can never relate it to the other things that you're trying to do. So at the end of the day, you have to sit there and put it all together yourself. And I'll pick on financial planners. I mean, most of the guys that I know that are financial planners, they know absolutely nothing about debt. Like they can't help you with debt at all. And so it's like, who do you go to? And, with my background with the CFA and whatnot, I was exposed to what's called family offices. And what a family office is a bunch of, it's a wealthy family, probably worth about 50 million or more at least. Maybe it's just an individual that sold a business. And then they hire a point person. Most of the time it's a CFA charter holder. And that point person then connects all these different things from real estate to trust. And they're the one making the decision and putting it together. And most people can't use that because it's too expensive. And so we said, okay, well, what can I do to piece all those things together, right? And that's our first algorithm, was putting all those things together so that way people can see it, and doing it with technology so it was cost efficient. And then what we said was, well, we need to then be able to map this over time so people can see what their options are and see what mistakes other people make so they can avoid those mistakes. And so we built a simulation technology where you can put in all that different stuff about, hey, what if I do this student loan plan or that one? What if I buy a house for, 200 grand or 300 grand? What if I don't buy a house? What if I rent instead and invest? What happens if I get married and my spouse's income is this? What if I have children? What if I need to buy a car? And you can literally map out all these events in the financial planning technology we have. Because again, one of the big problems I saw was you couldn't compare all these options very easily. You couldn't do all these things, right? And so that was the base of the technology. And then I found out there's two other problems. One, when do you use these products and how do you use them? Like insurance, life insurance, when do you need that? Disability insurance, when do you need that? When do I do student loan refinancing? Mortgages, like what type of mortgage should I use? How should I do it? Should I pay down points? Like we can then tie in optimization products at those point in times when you actually need them. So we tell you when you need them, and it's unbiased. You don't have to go to like a life insurance guy. He's going to be like, you need to buy, a $2 million cash value life insurance policy because that's what I get paid on. Like you don't have to worry about any of that. And so that was the third big thing. And the last big one was then how do I communicate this stuff? Like, how do I show you very easily, hey, this is renting a house versus buying a house. This is this strategy versus this strategy, whatever it is. And so we took all those moving parts. So like your income, your expenses, your 401k, your Roth, your homes, your debt, and we put it all into one algorithm, and it's one data point. We call it the FitBUX score. And so when I'm comparing my options, I can just look at the FitBUX score and see what's going to happen over time. Like, does this one tank? Does this one put me here? Does this one put me there? And then I can go into the details if I want to, but it allows you to very easily build a plan and see what's going to happen over time and simulate it. And then the one that I'm really excited for, we might have it out this month. It might be out next month though, is we're literally, instead of building your own plan, you can answer like 4 or 5 questions, then we just optimize the whole thing for you and say, this is exactly what you should be doing from a dollars and cents standpoint. So that one's coming out probably by next month, hopefully this month. But that's where we're at right now. And that's the key of what we're trying to do, is make this stuff easy and affordable. So you can piece all these things together instead of just going to a company and saying like, should I be right? Like, I go to SoFi, like, should I get a student loan refi? It's like, yeah, of course. That's how we get paid. I'm like, oh, fantastic. Like, let's do that. I don't know if I should be doing this or not, but okay. And so that's what we're there for, is basically the technology above the choice, like to help you make the choice. Should you be doing this or should you be doing that?
So it's basically like a Monte Carlo simulator, right? You plug in all the variables and it's going to tell you your probability of success. And that probability of success is the output would be the FitBUX score. Is that essentially how it works?
Yeah, especially when you get closer towards retirement. It's like, I call it Monte Carlo on steroids. Basically, so the key thing for younger people, this is what's so different about us and this technology. And because there's other companies that have tried to do this and they've failed miserably, because all they look at is the dollars and cents. Okay. And when you're young, it's really just like disheartening when you go on to, like Personal Capital. And it's like, congratulations, your net worth is negative $200,000. It's like, oh, like that's not encouraging. That's actually not accurate. And this is something that I learned from business. So when I was in valuation work, we used to have to value employees, intangible assets, copyrights, technologies, all these different things. And again, in business, we call those intangible assets. And it's like, well, we as people have intangible assets too. It's our education, it's our experiences, it's our background. And that results in a future income. And there's risk to that income. And in finance, we call that human capital. And the reason why that's so important, the details of that human capital dictate to us like what student loan plan to go on, what type of insurances you need, can you afford a house or not? It dictates all that stuff. And so we incorporate human capital into our analytics. So like the FitBUX score in the beginning, it basically is saying, here's your human capital, and how do you efficiently convert that into income? And then once you convert it into income, how can you efficiently turn that into financial capital? And so like when you come on to fitbux.com and you build out your profile, if you go to our net worth page, we actually put a value for your human capital value. So your overall net wealth is actually going to be positive. And now you just got to say, hey, how do I convert this human capital into income? Or what can I do to increase this human capital? So that way my knowledge and my skills, actually, I can monetize even more in the future. And so, yeah, it's Monte Carlo on steroids. The math side of me, the dork side of me goes a little crazy on that piece.
So walk us through just really quickly, Joe. You go through a series of questions as you enter the FitBUX platform. You come up with a score, and then I'm assuming that it's going to give you advice on kind of the sequence of which steps to take. And tell us also, I believe that you also have coaches that are available. So maybe just give us a little bit more of an overview there if you could.
Yeah, absolutely. So you build your profile. So we start off asking human capital questions, like your background, your education, all that type of stuff. And then we go in and we ask about your finances. Like, so we know where you're currently standing at with your income and assets and debt and everything else. And then you hit your dashboard and you have a number of different options. We originally built our financial planning technology specifically for people to call into us, and we would walk them through it. Okay? And so we have FitBUX coaches that you just schedule a time and you call us and go into it. On that, we call it a manual plan building. We just rolled out a new upgrade to it in September, where you can actually go in and build that on your own. You don't necessarily need a FitBUX coach anymore. You can build it and see everything. And then you can still call a coach. We can walk you through the options and explain to you the technology and how to use it effectively and all that type of stuff. And then the new one that I mentioned that's coming out either this month or next month, that's the one that will literally optimize the entire thing. It will even tell you like, hey, yeah, you should buy a house now, or no, you should actually pay off your car debt first and buy a house in 4 years when that car debt's paid off. Like, and here's why. And you can see the differences. So that one's the big one's coming out in the next few weeks. And then other things that you can do though, is we have like some basic calculators in there. Like if you want to really drill down on the individual topic, you can go in and say like, hey, what about this student loan plan versus that student loan plan? I'm thinking about getting a mortgage. What does that payoff look like? Should I be paying points or not on the mortgage? So those calculators are there, but we also have optimization AI that we've already rolled out there also. So it's things like, should I rent versus buy? You can ask that individual question there. How much home can I actually afford? You can ask that individual question there. And again, those optimizations take into account all that data that we collect on the individual when you build your profile. So yeah, it's all there, and we're rolling out more and more. And then we have our premium membership. Once you sign up, you can actually track your entire financial plan, and we will continue to tell you you're doing this right or you're doing this wrong. This month, we're actually tying in where you can actually start making your debt payments for like mortgages and student loans straight from FitBUX to your lenders and everything. So we make sure that you're doing it right. So yeah, we got a lot of big things that we're rolling out on that. But yeah, that's what it is right now, is to go in, and that optimization is there for you to use.
That's great, Joe. I mean, basically you've automated a family home office, and there's just too much to keep in mind. As you said, if you don't have any focus, you're not going to get the results you want. So I love the overview of the FitBUX platform. Thanks so much for that. Let's pivot to another major roadblock right now, if you could, because I'm really curious of your take on this. We're currently in the United States experiencing the highest inflation rates at, around 40 years, I believe, going back to 1982. And so I'm just curious, how do you think about inflation as it relates to young professionals and their investing, in their investing focus, and what they should be thinking about in light of these elevated rates of inflation?
Yeah, I always think of inflation as basically a backdoor tax. So that's why it's like, how are you supposed to deal with this? And, go back a year ago, we knew inflation was coming, and whenever inflation is coming, you don't want to be in debt. So it's like, you don't want to be an investor in debt. You don't want to be holding debt. Okay. Right. And so part of holding debt is actually like bank accounts. So when if you think about it, like my money is in a savings account. Basically the bank is lending my money. So I'm essentially fixed to that interest rate. So if all I'm getting is like 2% on a bank account, inflation is going to erode that in a heartbeat. Yeah. And everything goes in cycles, and even if inflation goes back down to 2%, it's 2% on an inflated number. Like the only way we're ever going to go back down is if deflation happens, which I doubt that it's going to happen. Okay. And so in my opinion, these prices are here to stay, and here to stay for a long time. And the reason why that's such a big deal is really the only way. That means like incomes will eventually catch up to that, which means people are going to be spending that money on businesses. And really the only way to capture that is the stock market or real estate, because rents go up, all that type of stuff. So like you got to be invested into that, or your real dollars are eventually just going to be eroded. Like you're not going to have anything. Yeah, you might have $100,000, but in 10 years from now, the real value might be like $40,000.
Right.
Only way to keep up with that is, to be invested. And yeah, you might feel some short-term pain right now, but even in terms of the stock market going down, but you have to sit there and stay invested. And, people ask me about real estate all the time. In the long run, we used to call real estate the wealthy man's investment, because land, not necessarily like home ownership, because land value, again, Josh, this, your listeners might not. When you buy a house, there could be actually separated into two values. One is land value. One is improvement value. So like the actual structure. Okay.
Yeah.
Land is one of the biggest inflation hedges that we have. It's basically the only thing that keeps up with inflation. And so when you're looking at trying to keep up with inflation, land, just home ownership is a great way to do it. A lot of us can't go into land because land's very expensive and it doesn't produce very much income. So the other way to do that is by buying rental properties, right?
Right.
So that in the stock market, I mean, it's hard, because you got to stomach some of the downturns, but in reality, like you said, that inflation, it's eroding everything. And I mentioned home affordability earlier. Even though I'm a valuation expert, like I do back of the napkin, like valuations on stuff very quickly, like in 5 to 10 minutes to say, do I think there's an opportunity here or not? Boom. And I'll give you an example. I did one on real estate in the area I live in, which is just outside of Austin, Texas. I did one back in September. And I said, look, if I hold everything constant, and I compare it to where we were a year ago in terms of interest rates and whatnot, and what the assumed DTI ratios, and then I hold that income constant and everything else, it would imply in my area that if everything stayed the same, housing prices would have to go down 30% to meet the affordability of what it was last year. And that's not saying it's like, hey, that's going to be down 30%. It's just now I can take that model and say, okay, as things change, as mortgage rates change, as this changes, that change, like maybe it goes down 50%. And I'm like, boom, like that meets about what I thought it was going to go down. Maybe it's 20%, whatever it is. Maybe it stays flat, whatever it is. And I'm getting ready to go into buying more properties. Like I just actually talked to one of your guys the other day about taking out a line of credit on one of our houses, not to actually use right now, but just to have the cash ready to go. So when I see that number, it's ready to go. And again, it has mostly to do with inflation. Like, money in the bank is not going to be anything. So get ready.
Yeah, I think, one of the, to dovetail on that, Joe, one of the big mistakes that I have seen people do through this period of inflation is to think that, hey, I'm just going to focus on paying off debt right now, and I'm going to wait to start my investing. And if you think about inflation, what it is essentially just the devaluation or the erosion of purchasing power of your dollar. So today you can get $1 worth of goods for $1, but in 20 years, you can only get 40 cents worth of goods for that same dollar. So that tells you that you're going to need more dollars in 20 years.
Yep.
And the path towards getting more dollars is to let compound interest work for you, which means you need to be invested earlier versus later so that you have more time to let those investments compound. And I think this might be kind of just an interesting segue. We're working on a presentation that we're doing for a lot of our clients this week. And so maybe what I'll do, Joe, is I'm just going to share my screen really quickly. Those of you that are listening in on the podcast, welcome you to also check this out on YouTube, where this will be published. But Joe, I'd really love your feedback on this. Is really what I'm looking for. So when this presentation that we're going to do is all about real estate investment and how that can lead to a secure retirement. And our advice in this presentation is not to only invest in stocks or only invest in real estate, but to have a balance of both. And one of the things that we're going to talk about is the 5 ways that you get paid in real estate. You get the home appreciation, which is the value of the property going up over time, which, if you look back over a 10, 20, 30-year period, real estate always does, very well over the long period. Amortization, because each month your mortgage balance is going down, unless you had an interest-only loan, but typically the loan amount is going down. You get paid in cash flow if you're bringing in more dollars than what your mortgage payment and renovation expenses might be. And then you get paid in terms of depreciation if you're able to take some of those tax deductions. The depreciation is essentially a phantom tax write-off that allows you to offset some of your taxable income if you qualify for that. And then the last one is rent inflation. And rent inflation is the value of rent going up over time. And inflation right now is really pushing rents up at some of the fastest pace ever. So if somebody had a 30-year fixed loan, their payment is the same, the balance on that mortgage is going down, but the rental income's going up. So the delta between your mortgage payment and your rental income is really going up. And one of the things we're trying to help people think through, Joe, is like, how do these 5 ways of getting paid in real estate, how do they compound over decades? I think people are pretty good in thinking in terms of months or even years. But when people try to think out 2 to 3 decades, it becomes a lot more challenging. So, we did this analysis, this case study, if you will, where we said, okay, let's assume we have 4% annual appreciation. And in 2022, you bought a home for $600,000. If we have 4% annual appreciation over the next 20 years, you end up with a house that's worth $1.3 million. So, you've more than doubled the value of the property, but that's not the only way you get paid. Another way you get paid is with an amortization. So let's assume that somebody took out a $480,000 mortgage on that property, 20% down. And let's just say they had a 5.5% interest rate. At the end of 20 years, your mortgage balance is down to $251,000. So you get the appreciation. You also get the amortization as the debt goes down. And then, of course, last but not least, you get the cash flow. And this is the one that I think people have the hardest time thinking about. I hear people talk about this far too seldom. If you calculate a 4% annual increase in rental income, then your rental income starts at around $2,100, but it grows to $6,135 a month as your mortgage payment stayed the same over that period of time. So kind of like the summary of this, right? Over 20 years, home value goes to 1.3 million, rental income goes up to 6,135 a month. Your loan balance is down to 251,000. So anyways, I'm just kind of curious as it relates to cash flow, Joe. What are your thoughts around that, and how are you positioning yourself to take advantage of that personally?
Me, I'm huge on cash flow. I love it, actually. Even with stock market investments, a lot of people don't realize they always quote this whole 8% return to the S&P 500. What they don't tell you in those high level like headline news things is when you actually look at the research, a majority of that return comes from dividends and dividend reinvestment, which dividend is basically cash flow for stocks. So
right,
like when we do our portfolios for our clients, so like on FitBUX, you can open up an investment account. Our portfolios are weighted towards investment producing assets because of that specific research. It's like, keep investing. Like, and I'll give you an example of how all this stuff works and really hit home on what you were just talking about. It's this misconception. So I saw, for those of you on the podcast, I could see it. Josh had, Robert Kiyosaki on there with Rich Dad, Poor Dad on front of the screen. And he talks a lot about cash flow and all that type of stuff. One of the things he talks about is starting businesses too. Okay. So, but the reality of it is when you look at millionaires, only about 20 or 30% of millionaires are actually self-employed. Okay. So a majority of millionaires were just your 9-to-5 worker that was putting money in a 401k. They've never gone into an individual stock. And they just were investing in real estate or whatever it is. So it's like, well, how do they do it? And that's one of the things that I've spent so much time researching is for that 70%, that's who we're looking at with FitBUX. What's the key of getting them there? And it goes to this 2 laws, basically. One's for exponential growth. Okay. So obviously, like if you go from 2 to 4, that doesn't seem like that much, but all of a sudden, if you go from $100,000 to $200,000, 200 to 400, 400 to 800, 800 to 1.6, like it gets exponentially bigger. And so when I realized that, I said, and that's, by the way, why the wealthy get wealthier is because they understand that exponential law of growth. So it's like when it comes to personal finance, how can you do that? Okay. And this goes to like what you were just talking about, Josh, in terms of the income and stuff. At FitBUX, we break down where you can put your money into 3 buckets. And one of them is day-to-day money, so like your day-to-day expenses, which also includes your income and stuff. The second one is building your future self, taking care of your future self. So either you're going to be putting money towards assets or paying off debt in that category. And the third one is risk management, insurance. Like, what am I doing to protect my overall financial plan? So those are only the 3 areas you can put your money. And your goal, what I've found, is to hit that exponential growth path. You need to put about 50% of your income into that second category, assets and debt. Okay. And most of us, especially when we're younger, we'll start off where we can maybe put 30 to 35% in that bucket, and about 50% goes into that first bucket of just day-to-day expenses. Now, we talked about mistakes earlier. What most people do make the mistake of is they start off at 50, going to the first bucket, 35, going to that second bucket, and their lifestyle creeps and they never change it. They never change it ever. Like, I know people 15 years ago, they started putting $100 in a Roth IRA. They're still doing $100 in a Roth IRA. It's like, dude, increase it. You're making way more. You have way more discretionary income. What are you doing? And it's like, well, I bought this, I bought that. It's just lifestyle creep. And so what we say at FitBUX, like when you're tracking your financial plan, one of your goals is to try to get to that 50% marker of going into assets and debt. And what people tend to forget, to your point, is that real estate and things like stocks, they pay income in forms of rent and everything else and dividends. And so, like in that example you gave, it's like if I'm making 60 grand a year, but then I'm collecting 60 grand a year in rent, I'm actually having $120,000 of income. And so over time, as I'm getting that in dividends, I should be able to be reinvesting that money into that second category and getting close to that 50%. And once you do that, it takes off. And that's why real estate, like you were talking about, with like the rental income, it will go up over time. Like dividend income will go up over time, and incorporate that. Like with our rental properties in San Jose, I mean, we're collecting something like $3,000 or $3,500 a month. I mean, just off my wife's 401k that she has, it's producing, I want to say $1,500 a month in dividends. It's like that's part of your income, and we're reinvesting all of that every month. And that's what helps you get to that exponential growth as soon as you can. So one takeaway from all that, I mean, it doesn't matter what the investments are. I'm huge on cash flow, but getting 50% of your income going to building assets and debt, because the way, Kiyosaki talks about it, the faster you get into those investments, the faster you can start taking advantage of tax laws too. And those tax laws will help you grow wealth even faster. But if you're trying to take your income and grow it, it's hard because of how much taxes you're paying. That's one of the biggest expenses in that first bucket of day-to-day money. And so the more you're getting that into assets and debt, the more income you're going to be able to produce and the less taxes you're going to be able to pay or have to pay. So there's that relationship there. So one big takeaway from that, try to get 50% of your income going into assets and debt. And eventually, most of the time when we do out a projection, if you're doing that, it will take about 10 to 20 years. And you can start from nothing. It will take about 10 to 20 years and you'll be worth over $1 million. So that's typically what we see in those projections.
And just to clarify, Joe, when you say get 50% of your income to go into investments and debt, you're saying 50% of your income to either invest 401k, 529, other non-retirement investments, and or pay down of debt, not the monthly payments that maybe go into interest, but you're talking about actual principal reductions on the debt. Is that right?
That is correct.
Yeah.
That is correct. Yeah.
It's so funny. As you were talking, I was thinking about, basically this is the 7 rules of money from the Richest Man in Babylon. Number 1 is start thy purse to fattening, which just means save, pay yourself first. You have to have some money left over. Number 2 is control the expenditures. That's the lifestyle creep that you were talking about. You got to, as your income grows, you have to keep the outgoing expenses down so that you can increase the ratio of money that's going to those investments. And then number 3 is make thy gold multiply. And literally, that's exactly what you just described. And it's crazy how a parable from 2,000 years ago is still the exact same rules of money today.
Yep. Well, it's actually funny. I was just reading a thing from Nikola Tesla, and he was like, the most scientifically advanced book that has been written is the Bible, because there's so much research into it. And like you said, it still applies today. Like all these things. And, I even took one from there. Like, people always ask me where I got this. We do this challenge with people. So like when you're trying to figure out on that first category, my day-to-day expenses, what can I cut? I was shocked when I heard this. 75% of people in this country have a budget. I'm like, that can't be true. But then I realized in that same study that only 25% actually follow their budget. And it's like, yeah, that's more like it. But I dove into deeper of why. It's a behavioral thing. When people try to do, they get all like, you might be listening to this podcast, right? You're like, okay, like I'm getting excited. I'm going to do this. And they try to cut all their expenses at one time and just make this major lifestyle change. And this wealth building thing takes a lot of time. And so most people within 2 or 3 months, if they don't see, they're not going to see instant results. Then all of a sudden the friends call them up. They're like, hey, like, let's go get some drinks or blah, blah, blah. It's like, oh, okay, whatever. And they just lifestyle creep right back out of it.
There goes.
So if you try to just cut all your expenses overnight, it's not going to work. So we have this thing we call like a 40-day challenge, is where you literally just pick one expense. That's it. They could be going out to eat dinner, whatever it is. And you just don't do it for 40 days. Like cut caffeine out of your life. Don't drink for 40 days, whatever it is. Like for 40 days, just don't do it. And after those 40 days, you get so accustomed to that lifestyle. Most of the time, you will never go back to spending it again. And people are like, where'd you come up with this 40 days thing? I'm like, have you ever read the Bible? Like it's in there, like it worked for them. Like it probably works for you. Like, and so, yeah, that's a lot of that stuff. It's like, yeah, like the blueprint is there. It's just a matter of saying, how do you do this? And then putting some numbers behind it. And again, that's why I'm so adamant with the FitBUX technology, looking at those percentages. What percentage of my money is going where? And the goal is to get to that 50%. And then when you're tracking it, making sure you're doing that. And if you do it, you'll be good to go.
Yep. It's not rocket science. I'm reading Ryan Holiday's new book, Discipline Equals Destiny, or Discipline is Destiny. And, you know, basically without that plan and the discipline to stay on it, you're either destined for success or not. Hey, Joe, last question, because we're running out of time here. I just want to end with asking you this question. What myth about finances do you wish people knew the truth about? Is there one thing out there that lands with you that people just get wrong most of the time?
Yeah, that you got to be an expert. I hear that all the time from people. They're like, you know, you think this stuff is easy because you spent so much time researching it. I don't want to spend that much time researching it. Like I talk to new grads all the time, like graduate students. So a lot of them are like 26 years old. And they're like, I've been going to school since I was 5. Like that's 21 years. I don't want to spend, and they equate, I got to spend another 21 years to learn this stuff about money.
Right.
They're like, screw that. I don't want to do it. And it's like, you know, keep it simple. Like you don't, it's not necessarily rocket science. Like if you just listen to this podcast and say, look, organize my money. Here's the 3 buckets: my day-to-day money, money for my future self, risk management. My goal is to get 50% of my income going to that middle bucket. Now I just need a system to be able to track that, to make sure I'm doing that correctly. That's all you need to do. And from there, it's like, well, if you decide to go into real estate, fantastic. If you decide to go into investments, fantastic. Like, or in the stock market, whatever it is, like it doesn't matter. If you're doing those things, you will be successful in the long run. I learned that, again, you talked about inheritance and like knowledge, you know, it's more than money, it's knowledge and whatnot. I'll never forget when I came home I had just graduated and, you know, from college, and I came back to visit my parents. And I was like 22, thinking like, oh, I just graduated. I got first in all these investment courses, like blah, blah, blah. Like,
got it figured out.
Yeah, I know everything. And I was just like, you know, my dad owns a few properties and he owned his own business. And his thing was always just, you know, get money from the business, put it into the bank. And, you know, when I found a piece of property, I'm going to buy it. And that's what he did. And I was like, Dad, check this out. Like, if you would have put this money in the stock market instead, like it would have been worth, you know, 17 million instead of 5 million. Like, you messed up. And his response was like, I don't give a shit. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, I don't know anything about the stock market. Like, this was simple. I understood it. And guess what? It worked. And it's like, yeah, that's a good point. And so that's the biggest myth about all this stuff about money is you got to make it extremely complex. And it's like, no, you don't. If you keep it simple, and you avoid some of these things, like we've talked about some of our discussion, like, you know, paying points potentially on a mortgage in the long run. Like, you know, and I just did a webinar on that a few days ago where, you know, you could put another 150 to 200 grand in your pocket if you do that correctly, like things like that with the seller help concessions and whatnot. Like, you know, if you understand little things like that and you actually work with experts to do that, and they're looking at the big picture of what you're trying to do, you can easily put a lot more money in your pocket. And so that's what I always say is have a simple understanding, build out a plan, implement it, and have a simple way of doing it. And you should be fine. But that's the myth. It doesn't need to be complex. Like, you don't need to do option trading. You don't need to do crypto. If you got the simple stuff done and you want to go into that, hey, so be it. But get the simple stuff done first, and then
foundation.
Go. Yep.
Yeah. I love that, Joe. And I'm so grateful for you and your team at FitBUX, that's what you're committed to do, is make it simple, build the plan, and execute the plan. So, Joe, I know our guests are going to want to know how to reach you, how to find FitBUX. So how can somebody reach out to you and find more about your company?
Yeah, just on social media. If you guys want to follow us, it's on Facebook, FitBUX Finance Group, and then on Instagram at FitBUX Official. That's those two places where we primarily put out like our blogs and podcasts and videos and stuff. And then if you actually want to use FitBUX, just go to fitbux.com, build a profile, you hit your dashboard. You can either start building a plan right away, or if you want to, there's a little phone icon up in the top corner. You just click that, jump on a call with the FitBUX coach, and go from there.
Love it, Joe. Thanks so much for sharing so generously with us today. We appreciate you and look forward to having you back at a future episode.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.